Everyone thinks I'm loyal, but I've been secretly planning my escape with my ex in a hidden forest cabin, and the worst part is I'm good at planning, too good. I'm Lena, I'm 32, and I'm an urban planner who spends her days drawing routes for other people's lives to move through cleanly while mine doubles back on itself like a fox that knows it's being followed. Which is to say I've been laying out cul-de-sacs and bike lanes and stormwater paths while drafting a getaway map I keep. Pretending is just a mental exercise I'm doing for fun on the train home. The ex is Marco. We were 21 and rash when it started, we were 27 and righteous when it ended, and somewhere between those ages we learned the shape of each other's laugh so well it lives under my skin like a tattoo done in invisible ink. The hidden forest cabin isn't a Pinterest fantasy, no fairy lights, no copper bathtub dragged through bracken for content. It's a sturdy, ugly, perfect box of eucalyptus boards and stubborn windows built by his uncle in the 80s on a slice of land that's technically inside a conservation corridor and practically in a pocket dimension. If you don't know where the turnoff is, you don't find it. The first time Marco took me there, he made me close my eyes for the last kilometer. I tasted dust and possibility in his ridiculous mint gum, and when we stopped, the air smelled like the color green. My husband is Will. He writes code that keeps hospital systems ticking, which makes him both a hero and a man who talks to servers like they're horses that need soothing. He has a patient way of buttering toast that feels like he's apologizing on behalf of the day. At dinner, he asks genuine questions, not the kind that feel like cue cards. He tucks receipts into his wallet in chronological order. He thinks loyalty is an action you perform so routinely it becomes part of your walk. Most days I agree with him. Some nights I go stand on the balcony, listen to the city hum like a computer sleeping with one eye open, and feel the forest press up against the inside of my ribs. I plan things for a living, so I planned this in the language of work. I called it a scenario, not a sin. I built a spreadsheet called Elsewhere because naming a thing in a professional font can stop it from biting. It had tabs. Food, transport, legal, money, narrative. Yes, narrative. That's the column where I wrote down what I would say to the people who believe I am made of reliable wood. Not lies exactly. Versions. The edible kind of truth you can serve without choking. I wasn't the kind of person who makes getaways. I was the kind of person who drafts contingencies. That's what I told myself as the cell in my sheet filled with numbers that looked suspiciously like departure dates, flight options, petrol costs, cabin inventories. I kept the file on a thumb drive labeled Parking Study _2019. If you ever want to hide something from an urban planner, put it in a parking study. How's Will? Marco texted me after 3 silent years, which is such an impolite question when you're the one person who used to know exactly how my mornings tasted. I should have put the phone in a drawer and then put the drawer in the ocean. I texted back, steady as a footpath. He replied with a photo of a brown river in flood and the caption, "My years are mostly this," and I laughed in that awful alive way that feels like cheating on grief. He asked, polite as a neighbor leaning over a fence, "Do you still remember the turnoff?" I stared at the message until the words rearranged themselves into a map only I could read. Sometimes, I wrote. It started stupidly small. Lists. If I were to go, I'd need to buy a proper headlamp. The old one in the cabin had the kind of battery compartment that resented human fingers. If I were to go, I'd need a second phone charger. I once spent 6 days up there with Marco rationing power like it was a hymn. If I were to go, I'd need to check the roof under the big stringer bark. Leaf litter makes a thatch and then a problem. You see the trick, right? If I were to go. Future conditional is the friend of every coward who wants to feel clever. I wrote to Marco, if someone were to winter the cabin, what would they need? He listed items like he was reading my mind aloud. Kindling. Patience. A wick for the stubborn lamp. A bag for your old self. I typed rude and my fingers felt like they were practicing a new alphabet. Will is the kind of man who notices my eyebrows before I can decide what I want to say with them. 2 weeks into my spreadsheet habit, he put a mug of tea beside my laptop and asked if my big corridor project had become a sad Sudoku. I considered telling him the truth the way you consider jumping into cold water. The imagined shock becomes its own drug. I told him the city had asked for 3 alternative alignments and all of them needed a chance to be the hero. He kissed the back of my neck and said, "You're very good," and I had to sit there being a person who was both loved and plotting. I don't want you to think Marco is a cartoon. He's not. He's less charming than memory might prefer and more careful than I ever gave him credit for. He's a bushfire engineer now, the kind of man who can stand where a house used to be and tell you how the wind argued with it and what to do next time if you're given the grace of a next time. He doesn't drink anymore. He has a small scar near his temple from the time he misjudged a nail and the nail voted back. He said he wasn't writing songs like he used to because rhythm felt like a presumption right now, but sometimes when he spoke about the cabin a melody got into his sentences. The cabin has a water tank that glugs conversationally, a stove that loves matches to be struck with confidence, a chair that only accepts people who sit honestly. If we went, he wrote, and yes, he said we because language is a door you can pretend you're just leaning against, would have to heat the pipes gently. The winter up there sulks if you rush it. I told myself I would just go once to inventory repairs. That's a planner's verb, inventory. It's the cleanest lie I know. I told Will there was a site visit in the hills because a counselor wanted to see how green links actually link, not just on paper. He nodded, kissed my cheek, reminded me to pack the good muesli bars, the ones that taste like oats that got a job. In the car, music sounded like someone narrating a movie I wasn't proud to be in. At the turnoff, my hands signaled before my brain had a say. The track was how I remembered it, 2 good ruts and a story about erosion. I parked where we always park, behind a fallen limb shaped like a question. I walked the last 100 meters because you have to arrive on foot to deserve the door. The cabin was insulted we'd left it, which is to say it was fine. Dust sat on things like a polite audience waiting for a performance to start. I opened the windows and the room took a whole breath. In the corner, the cot we'd never sold or given away still sulked, folded down like a secret mistake. I hated it. I sat on the stoop and tried to make my face do the expression of a woman who had simply come to check a hinge. Then the kookaburra started laughing at me like a teacher who knows I didn't do the reading. It's unfair how birds betray you. Marco arrived with the afternoon. He knocked, he has always knocked, even on his own life. He looked like a man who'd been arguing with roads and winning. We stood a meter apart and said each other's names as if spelling counted. "We shouldn't," I said. "We aren't," he replied, and it was the most honest dodge either of us had ever made. We did cabin chores like teenagers trying to earn an adult's trust. Cleared the gutter. Shook out the rugs. Sorted through preserved jars from a year I don't want to name and threw out the ones that suggested botulism. We sat on the porch with our mismatched mugs and watched the trees trade gossip with the wind. When he reached for my hand, I put mine on my own knee. It felt like we were rehearsing for a marathon and refusing to bite the energy gel. That night I did not sleep much. The forest breathed like a large animal trying to remember its own dream. I lay there listening to the tank gurgle and the occasional drip somewhere deep in the pipes that always sounds like a warning in a language I refuse to learn. I thought of Will. I pictured him folding tea towels like he folds new problems, slowly, with respect. I pictured him brushing his teeth and smiling with toothpaste on his lip in the bathroom mirror, the way he does to make me laugh. I pictured leaving in a way I could forgive myself for. I pictured staying in a way my chest could survive. It was not a good night. In the morning, clarity arrived disguised as work. The back deck had a rotten board. The roof needed a patch over the kitchen. The small solar array wanted its bird droppings evicted. The tiny things that keep a place livable had stopped being maintained, and it was a relief beyond poetry to attend to them. I am a woman who likes fixing. I cannot fix the part of me that thinks escape is a geometry test I might pass, but I can fix a board. We did. We sanded a bench and oiled it and watched the wood drink like it had been waiting to be believed. I told myself this would be the end of it. I told myself I'd go home with sawdust in my hair and that would be enough to scratch the itch cold we could have. Then I did the stupidest, most human thing. I opened the narrative tab in my spreadsheet and wrote a script that began, "We both deserve a life that fits." I wrote it for Will. I wrote it for me. I wrote it for a judge who lives only in my head and bangs a gavel fashioned from my mother's disapproval. When I read it back, it sounded like a brochure from a counseling clinic that wants to be chic. I closed the laptop and put my forehead against its lid like I could cool my face on a flat lie. Back in the city, Will handed me a parcel that had arrived while I was gone, a second-hand copy of a book I'd mentioned in passing weeks ago about public benches and loneliness. He'd found it somehow and had it wrapped in brown paper like a bakery. "For your weird niche," he said, and my heart did that thing where it tries to be a fist and a flower at once. He makes it hard to leave. That's not a complaint, it's the point. I kept planning. That's the truth you keep in your mouth like a coin. I told myself I needed to plan so that I could decide not to execute the plan. That's like lighting a fuse to prove you understand fire. I researched the boring cruelty of separation, leases, storage units, timelines, how to tell friends who invested in the version of us that hosts barbecues without breaking their faith in whatever myth keeps them walking straight. I toured a studio near a small park. I timed how long it would take to ride a bike from there to the train station you could use to get most places a person might want to go. I stood in the empty room and whispered, "You'll hate me less if I'm clean," and the room said nothing because rooms are not cold-blooded, they are just patient. Marco and I had rules. I wrote them in my head like signposts. No staying more than 2 nights. No touching when the light goes off automatically. Would installed a stupid solar-powered stake lamp that died in 6 hours. It was a perfect metaphor for our restraint. No photographs. No joking about joint bank accounts or whose name would go on the dog we would never have. He broken one rule first. He took my picture while I was patching the roof and then deleted it in front of me, and the deletion felt intimate enough that I had to sit down. I broke another rule weeks later when we were closing the storm shutters before leaving, and I said, "You should label these," as if I was staying. We did not sleep together until the week we nearly drowned the little road. The creek swelled after a proper dump of rain and the culvert clogged with branches and a hubcap. We pulled on boots and stood in clay while the world reminded us we are not in charge. He reached for a branch, his foot went, his knee went, his expletive went, and I grabbed his jacket like a person who still believed she had the right to keep him alive. We were soaked and ridiculous and fragile in a way you only get to be with people who know the scar map of your past. When it was over, we stood there laughing like 2 idiots who had nearly lost, and then we kissed because we were too tired to keep telling ourselves no. Guilt changes your sense of smell. Everything in my city life started to carry a faint scent of eucalyptus and wet socks. I'd be at a meeting about rezoning an old textile mill for apartments and I'd catch a ghost whiff of damp timber and my mouth would fill with secrecy. Will noticed but gave it the gentlest possible name. "You've been foresty," he said one night, smiling. "It suits you." I went to the bathroom, looked at my face, and tried to find the person I want to be when I'm 90 and not sorry. She frowned at me like a woman who knows more about endurance than romance. The plan sharpened until you could cut bread with it. I could leave in March. The lease on our place renewed in April. It would be cleanest to do it before. I could arrange my work projects so the handover cost the fewest bruises. I could ask my sister to keep a box of things that would hurt Will to see me take. I could tell our friends in sentences that honored what would been without leaving them with a headache. I could tell my mother last because I am not foolish. I could walk out of our front door with 2 suitcases and a map of a life that looked adult enough to convince the future. And then Will got sick for 3 weeks in a very ordinary way, flu that refused to leave like a boring house guest, and I did the most ordinary thing, I made soup. And the soup was the best thing I've ever designed. Garlic, thyme, potatoes, a chicken that had lived a good life according to its label. I stood at the stove and felt the plan crease in my pocket. I took his temperature in the night and told him a daft story about a bench I'd found near a stormwater inlet where nobody would ever choose to sit, and he laughed in the loose way you laugh when your body is busy. He thanked me for washing the glasses by hand because the dishwasher was still sulking about something trivial. I watched his chest rise and fall and wished for a different ache. Marco texted, "So, that's all. We are both very good at compression." I typed, "I can't do it like this." He wrote back, "Like what?" I wrote, "As a theft." He said he understood but hated the honesty for how much it did not give him. We agreed to stop planning and either commit or quit. We're too old for exit rehearsals, he said. We're exactly the right age for maintenance, I said, thinking of Will asleep upstairs and the soup cooling quietly in its pot like a decision made by a kitchen. I told Will 3 days later. The truth, not the brochure. Not the version with the soft edges polished shiny by therapy words. I told him there was a cabin. I told him there was a person in it whose gravity I had pretended to resist with notebooks. I told him I have been walking around like a woman with her hand on a doorknob no one else could see. I told him I had planned an escape and backed out inside the final kilometer because love is sometimes a traffic calming device and sometimes a floodgate and sometimes a simple, uncompelling choice to be kind when no one is clapping. He didn't speak for a long time. He went to the sink and ran the tap and turned it off and stood with his hands on the edge the way men stand when they are doing arithmetic that requires quiet. Then he said, "Do you want to stay because you're afraid to go or because you want to stay with me?" I said, yes, and we both understood I'd answered the wrong question. So he asked a better one, what would staying look like if we designed it on purpose? That's when I started crying in the specific, muscular way you cry when someone opens a window in a room you've been pretending has enough air. We made a plan because of course we did. A new corridor through our small city that is our life. We wrote it on butcher's paper because that's what we do when we want the future to see we tried. There was a list of things we would change because we wanted to be the kind of people who would have to plan less for escape. Weekly breathers where I go to trees alone without designing an ending around them. A rule about telling each other when a past is loud in our ears so the present can crowd it out with something worth hearing. A promise to build boring rituals so good they'd look like spells from the right angle. He asked if he could read the spreadsheet. I said no. He didn't press. We took a photo of the butcher's paper and then we cooked dinner standing shoulder to shoulder, which is the most romantic posture I know. I wrote to Marco what I had to write. Not cruel. Not coy. I want a life that doesn't require me to stage a departure to feel true, I said. I'm choosing the long way around inside the city I already built. He replied with a photo of the deck we'd sanded and oiled together. The light made it look like a promise. Take care of your benches, he wrote. I'll take care of the roof. I said, thank you for building a door with me even if I didn't walk through it, and he said, I'm keeping the door, it's good carpentry, and I laughed the kind of laugh that knows grief is a professional. Everything after is not thrilling. It is good. I deleted elsewhere. I kept the thumb drive as a relic of the person I almost was. I go to the little park near the studio I almost rented and sit on a bench some council in term probably picked from a catalogue, and I let myself feel like a hypocrite until the feeling runs out of batteries. Will and I have a very stupid weekly game called Design a Better Bin Enclosure, where we send each other photos of terrible ones and write proposals full of puns. I text Marco once, months later, a single line, is the roof sound? He replies with a thumbs up and the weather. We do not say each other's names. Sometimes I wake before Will and sit with my toes pressed to the cool tile and imagine the track in, the limb like a question, the cabin waiting without wanting. Sometimes I want it so much that my teeth ache. Then I walk to the kitchen and start coffee and listen for the sound of him coming down the hall, that mix of bare feet and throat clearing and the small snore left over, and I put 2 mugs out because love is counting to 2 without looking. We eat toast and talk about gentle things until one of us introduces a hard thing and the other one leaves the toaster and comes to the table because we promise to go toward, not away. Everyone thinks I'm loyal. I am now, but not because I am stainless. Because I drew the map of my own leaving in such detail that I could finally see the streets where I could stay. Because there is a man who asked me to design a life with him like it was a treaty between neighboring cities who share a river. Because there is a cabin with a roof that will need patching every few years whether I live there or not, and the knowledge that things require maintenance is not a reason to flee, it's an invitation to choose what you maintain. Because the forest will keep being a forest without me, and that is terrible and beautiful and relieves me of the job of saving it by sleeping in it. The last time I went up alone announced final, I left a note in the drawer beside the stove. Soundness list, it said, and below it an inventory of screws and paint and patience. I added, thank you for teaching me that escape is a skill and so is staying put. I am keeping both. I locked the door and hid the key where we always hid it, in a place so obvious only love would think to look. Then I drove back to the city and made dinner, and when Will came home I said, "Best minute," and he told me something small about a coffee machine at work that kept acting like a fountain, and we laughed until the kitchen felt like the cabin, which is to say safe in a language no one hears unless you invite them in.